From the moment Alara's father remarried, the household had shifted into a world of shadowed corners and whispered rules. The new stepmother, Lady Malvina, carried herself with an air of regal entitlement that seemed at odds with the modest walls of the family home, yet her presence was overpowering. Every decision she made was calculated to elevate her own children while diminishing Alara, the daughter of the first wife, whose quiet intelligence and natural charm had begun to draw admiration from servants and neighbors alike. Alara's gentle disposition, once a source of warmth in the home, became in Lady Malvina's eyes a threat that had to be contained, controlled, and corrected through constant demonstration of power and preference for her own children. Lady Malvina's favoritism was subtle at first, manifested in small privileges granted to her children. Sweeter treats at breakfast, the finest fabrics for their dresses, and attention from their father that Alara had once taken for granted. The contrast was stark. While her step-siblings basked in luxury and indulgence, Alara's daily routine became a rigorous schedule of chores, errands, and humiliating tasks designed to assert control. She cleaned the hearth until her hands were raw, polished the floors until they shone like glass, and arranged every room with meticulous care, yet her efforts were met with indifference or, at times, sharp criticism. A smudge on a window or a slightly crooked vase would earn a reprimand from Malvina, while the same mistakes from her own children were forgiven with gentle laughter or praised as clever improvisation. The stepmother's cruelty was not only measured in labor and neglect but in psychological games that tested Alara's patience and courage. Malvina would call her to the hall and ask her to fetch items that were never really needed, or deliberately provide false instructions that resulted in minor accidents, then scold her for failing. Sometimes she would place Alara in situations designed to humiliate her before the servants, ordering her to serve her siblings first at meals, ensuring that she ate the least or the coldest portion. Through these orchestrated indignities, Lady Malvina communicated a constant, unspoken message, that Alara was an outsider, less valued, and entirely subject to her authority. Yet what made Lady Malvina particularly insidious was the way she cloaked her malice in the guise of care or propriety. "I am teaching you discipline," she would say, her voice soft but commanding. "One day you will understand why I must guide you so strictly." Her words were laced with authority, and any defiance from Alara would be met with icy looks, subtle threats, or withdrawal of basic privileges. The household became a delicate chessboard, where Alara had to navigate her daily life carefully, aware that a single misstep could invite further punishment, ridicule, or even isolation. The tension in the house was palpable, lingering like a cloud over every meal, every chore, every glance exchanged between family members. Servants whispered cautiously about the stepmother's temperament, and her children, though younger and often innocent of malice themselves, absorbed the lessons of envy and dominance, mimicking their mother's favoritism in their interactions with Alara. Each day was a test of endurance, a series of small but cumulative torments designed to break her spirit or bend her will to the stepmother's whims. And yet, despite the cruelty, there was a quiet resilience in Alara that Malvina could not fully perceive. Alara's strength was subtle but unmistakable. She carried herself with dignity even when burdened with the heaviest chores, her head held high, her eyes calm and observing. She learned to read the moods of the household, anticipating Malvina's shifts between cold disdain and performative care, and to navigate her assignments with care, precision, and discretion. Her intelligence and patience became her shields. She understood that overt resistance would only worsen her circumstances, but subtle observation and measured response allowed her to endure, to survive, and to retain her sense of self. The household's atmosphere, tense and fraught with unspoken threats, became a crucible in which both cruelty and resilience were refined. Malvina's favoritism, though intended to assert dominance, inadvertently highlighted Alara's quiet virtues. While her stepmother sought to humiliate and suppress her, the contrast between her own spoiled children and Alara's composed grace revealed, to any observant onlooker, the injustice of the treatment. Servants who once watched passively began to notice her patience, the neighbors who saw her in public remarked on her poise, and even Malvina's minor lapses in judgment exposed cracks in her careful veneer of control. Malvina's envy was fueled by the subtle admiration Alara received despite the harsh treatment. The girl's intellect, kindness, and unshakable composure became the very qualities that Malvina feared would outshine her own children and undermine her authority. Every act of cruelty, every display of favoritism, was an attempt to assert control over a force that could not be fully constrained, Alara's integrity and inner strength. The tension in the household, charged with resentment and hidden admiration, created an environment where the consequences of envy and malice were brewing, foreshadowing the eventual reckoning that would come from the universe itself, aligning with the girl's quiet resilience. The day the key went missing, the household seemed to thrum with a tension heavier than usual. Ilara had grown accustomed to the quiet oppression, the calculated favoring of her stepmother's own children, and the endless petty tests of obedience. Yet when she reached for the key that would unlock the small chest containing her mother's letters and cherished mementos, a tangible connection to the life she once knew, she found it gone. Panic did not overtake her immediately. Instead, a steady, focused dread settled into her chest. She knew without a shadow of doubt that her stepmother had taken it, hiding it with malicious intent. This key was not merely metal and wards, it was a symbol of her autonomy, her heritage, and her private world, all of which Malvina sought to control and dominate. Ilara's first instinct was disbelief. Could her stepmother truly have stooped to such petty cruelty? The thought of Malvina, so careful with appearances, resorting to secret sabotage, was unsettling. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The small chain usually tucked beneath Ilara's pillow was missing. Her mind raced as she traced the day's events. Perhaps Malvina had deliberately distracted her earlier, orchestrating a series of tasks that drew her attention away from the chest. Perhaps she had watched silently, relishing the moment when the key would disappear from Ilara's grasp, leaving her powerless. The thought alone made Ilara's stomach tighten, a cold mixture of frustration and anticipation of what might come next. The girl moved cautiously through the household, her eyes flicking to every shadow, every polished surface where a key could be hidden. She knew that any outward show of panic or frustration would be noticed and possibly twisted against her. Lady Malvina's presence was always suffocating, a silent pressure that watched, weighed, and measured each of Ilara's gestures. To act hastily or angrily would give the stepmother satisfaction, further confirming her dominance. Ilara therefore restrained herself, taking care to approach the search with quiet diligence, her movements deliberate and her mind calculating. Every corner of the room she frequented, behind curtains, under cushions, within the folds of blankets, was inspected. Yet despite her efforts the key remained elusive. Each hour that passed without finding it heightened the tension. Her stepmother's malice was no longer a distant, abstract presence. It had taken tangible form in this one act of obstruction. Malvina had taken the key not to hide it permanently but to assert control, to demonstrate that even the smallest measures of Ilara's independence were subject to her will. The chest, locked and silent, taunted Ilara with the promise of private knowledge and cherished memories, each moment of delay intensifying the emotional stakes. She could almost feel her mother's absent gaze, a tender reminder of the love and care embedded in each letter and token, fueling her determination to regain what was taken. The suspense was thick in every corner of the house. Ilara's stepmother moved through her day with an almost theatrical calm, pretending that nothing had occurred, a small, cruel smile hidden behind courteous words and practiced gestures. Malvina would pass Ilara's search with a raised brow, an almost imperceptible smirk at the futility of the girl's efforts. It was a game of patience and observation. The key was the object but the real measure was power. Who controlled whom? Who dictated the rhythm of the household? Who held authority, even in the small, private moments that defined Ilara's autonomy? As the day drew on, Ilara's strategy shifted. Frustration threatened to overtake calm, but she reminded herself that haste would be punished. She began to anticipate Malvina's patterns, noticing how she moved from room to room, when she paused to check on her children, and when her attention wavered from the household's daily routines. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ilara's eyes caught glimpses of misaligned objects, faint scratches on furniture, and subtle anomalies in the arrangement of shelves and drawers. These small details hinted at the key's hiding place, a carefully chosen location that reflected Malvina's desire for secrecy and control. Each discovery was a step closer, each hint a breadcrumb leading toward recovery. By evening, the tension in the household had grown palpable. Servants whispered softly among themselves, sensing the shift in energy. Even the children, oblivious to the complexities of adult cruelty, could feel the unease that radiated from their stepmother and the careful patience of the girl. Ilara's calm demeanor, though challenged by rising frustration, became a quiet force that contrasted sharply with Malvina's quiet, tense vigilance. It was a battle of wills, played out in the smallest of details. The placement of objects, the careful observation of behavior, the unspoken tension that filled the air like a taut string ready to snap. The missing key, more than just a tool for access, became a symbol of autonomy, resilience, and the power of observation and patience. Its absence highlighted the cruelty inherent in envy and favoritism while simultaneously revealing the depth of Ilara's character. She could have reacted with anger, resentment, or fear, but instead she relied on careful reasoning, observation, and inner strength to navigate the trap set by her stepmother. The suspense of not knowing where the key was, coupled with the potential consequences of being discovered searching too boldly, created a tense, almost suffocating atmosphere within the household. In that quiet, high-stakes tension, the stage was set for what would follow. The key was missing, the stepmother's malice had been fully realized, and Alara's patience and resilience were being tested in the crucible of cruelty. Yet within her, the fire of resolve burned quietly, a subtle promise that she would not be defeated by envy, spite, or obstruction. The hidden key was more than a missing object. It was the catalyst for a reckoning, a symbol of justice waiting to manifest, and a challenge that would ultimately reveal the depth of both her stepmother's malice and her own quiet, indomitable strength. Alara had learned early in her life that patience was more than a virtue. It was a shield, a quiet armor against the relentless cruelty that shaped her daily existence. The household, dominated by her stepmother's whims and calculated malice, demanded a careful balance of observation and restraint. Every gesture, every word, every glance could be scrutinized and misinterpreted, turning even innocent curiosity into a source of punishment. In this tense environment, Alara's survival depended on her ability to watch, to learn, and to act with careful deliberation, letting her intelligence guide her through the treacherous currents of domestic intrigue. The missing key had become a focal point of her awareness, a tangible symbol of her stepmother's control and her own limited autonomy. Alara approached each day with meticulous caution, noting Malvina's patterns, moods, and tendencies. She observed how her stepmother moved through the house, the pauses and hesitations in her steps, the moments when her attention drifted, and the subtle ways she tried to manipulate the household environment to her advantage. Every action, every placement of an object, every interaction with her children was studied with a quiet, analytical eye. Alara's patience was active, not passive. It was a disciplined attentiveness that allowed her to anticipate malice and respond without giving it power over her. While Malvina sought to provoke frustration, anger, or rash action, Alara held herself with calm precision. She knew that reaction would serve her stepmother's schemes, providing both satisfaction and justification for further cruelty. Instead, Alara used observation as a tool of strategy. She mapped the house in her mind, noting which drawers were often checked, which corners were hidden from watchful eyes, and where the small chest, her only access to the key, might be influenced by Malvina's hand. In the quiet corners of the home, she took mental notes, catalogued every irregularity, and predicted potential moves, treating the stepmother's malice as a game of intelligence rather than one of brute force. Her patience was also a shield for endurance. Day after day, Alara moved through her household duties with silent diligence, performing tasks with care while remaining mentally alert. The menial chores, cleaning, cooking, tending to the younger children, became opportunities to observe the rhythms of the household and the fluctuations in her stepmother's focus. Every time Malvina's gaze lingered suspiciously, Alara held her composure, understanding that her calm demeanor was as powerful as any defense. It was a form of quiet resistance, an assertion that her spirit could not be bent by cruelty or favoritism. Alara's strategic thinking extended beyond mere observation. She began to test the limits of her stepmother's control without overt confrontation, gently probing for weaknesses in the schemes designed to oppress her. When given instructions, she performed them to the letter while subtly learning their patterns and anticipating potential traps. She observed how Malvina misdirected servants, delayed tasks, or created false impressions to assert dominance. By carefully noting these manipulations, Alara prepared herself to reclaim control over her own life, one small action at a time. Each successful observation, each subtle recognition of deceit, was a quiet victory, building her confidence while keeping her safe from immediate retribution. Even in the face of repeated humiliation, the girl's intelligence shone through. She recognized that her stepmother's cruelty was rooted in envy and insecurity. Understanding this, Alara refrained from direct confrontation, knowing it would only escalate the malice. Instead, she cultivated patience, letting her keen perception guide her through the labyrinth of household schemes. She quietly predicted when Malvina's attention would waver, when opportunities to access hidden items or overhear important conversations might arise, and how to use each moment strategically. Every careful movement was calculated, and each decision reflected a depth of intelligence far beyond what her stepmother expected. The household itself became a canvas for Alara's endurance. She moved through it like a silent observer, noting not only the stepmother's actions but also the reactions of servants and siblings. She recognized how fear and favoritism influenced behavior, and she adapted accordingly. While others might act rashly in response to injustice or intimidation, Ilara maintained a composed vigilance, using each instance as a lesson in both patience and strategy. Her quiet endurance became a force in itself, an unseen yet potent influence on the dynamics of the household. As days turned into weeks, and the key remained hidden, Ilara's careful planning and unyielding patience paid dividends. She learned to wait for the right moments, when Malvina's attention was divided or when the household routine offered her a chance to act. Every small observation, every calculated pause strengthened her position. The stepmother's schemes, though cruel and relentless, could not fully anticipate the combination of patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking that Ilara employed. It was a testament to the power of quiet endurance, showing that true strength is often unseen, and that even under relentless oppression, one can navigate the path to justice with composure and skill. In the midst of cruelty and envy, Ilara's patience was not passive. It was an active living strategy, a way to preserve herself, understand her adversary, and ultimately prepare for the moment when fairness and justice could prevail. Her calm observation, intelligence, and strategic patience became her greatest assets, quietly shaping the course of her life and ensuring that no malice, however persistent, could ever fully overcome her spirit. Through these trials, she was not merely surviving. She was learning, growing, and quietly asserting the power that comes from wisdom, endurance, and moral clarity. Lady Malvina's malice had always simmered beneath a polished surface, but as she noticed Ilara's quiet intelligence and growing awareness, it began to boil with increasingly intricate schemes. The missing key was no longer a simple act of concealment. It had become a chess piece in a larger game of control, and Malvina's creativity and cruelty reached new heights. She understood that straightforward attempts to punish or humiliate the girl had proven ineffective. Ilara's patience and careful observation thwarted her most obvious tricks. So now the stepmother devised subtler, more insidious strategies to manipulate the household and ensure that Ilara could not regain access to the key or the door it unlocked. Malvina began by introducing distractions into the daily routine. She placed obstacles in Ilara's path, assigning tasks that required intricate attention to detail, leaving her physically exhausted and mentally strained. These chores were timed carefully so that by the end of the day, Ilara would have neither the energy nor the focus to search for the key effectively. Malvina took note of each small success, praising her own children with exaggerated approval while keeping her eyes on Ilara, watching for signs of fatigue or frustration. Yet, even as these tactics became increasingly oppressive, Ilara maintained her calm, using moments of rest to quietly plan her next moves. Next, the stepmother employed deception to mislead the girl directly. Malvina would casually mention false locations for the key or suggest that certain drawers and cupboards had already been checked, attempting to lure Ilara into wasted efforts. Every suggestion carried an undertone of mockery, a hidden promise that failure would bring embarrassment. The stepmother's voice, gentle on the surface, dripped with manipulation, designed to make Ilara question her own observations and judgment. Ilara, however, recognized the pattern. She paused, assessed the situation, and decided that these false leads were traps to consume her time and energy. Her patience and discernment became her defense against the stepmother's escalating deceit. Malvina's tactics grew more complex as she enlisted the cooperation of her own children and some compliant servants. The children were tasked with accidentally misplacing objects, creating small disturbances that required Ilara's attention. Servants were subtly encouraged to offer misleading information or to report minor mistakes by Ilara as significant oversights, making her appear careless in front of others. Each of these schemes was designed to erode her confidence, to convince her that she was incapable of solving the mystery of the missing key. Yet Ilara's strategic thinking allowed her to see through the orchestration. She noted patterns, observed motivations, and carefully tracked which distractions were intentional, mentally cataloging each as a lesson in patience and discernment. The stepmother also attempted psychological manipulation, appealing to Ilara's sense of morality and duty. Malvina would frame her instructions as guidance for the good of the household or as tests of character. "Surely you would not leave the family in disorder," she would say, her tone both chiding and seemingly caring. The statement was meant to induce guilt, a subtle coercion designed to draw Ilara's attention away from her personal quest for the key. Yet Ilara understood the malice beneath the politeness. She recognized that every plea for obedience was a test of submission, a trap to delay her progress and assert dominance. She accepted the moral framing, but she did not surrender her agency, quietly planning each step with deliberate foresight. Malvina's malice eventually escalated into overt trickery. She began to conceal the key in increasingly elaborate hiding places, moving it from one location to another, sometimes in plain sight, other times in shadows or behind objects that required careful observation to notice. The girl's steps became silent exercises in attention, her eyes scanning for subtle anomalies, the slight misalignment of a box, a drawer that seemed out of place, the faint glimmer of metal reflecting light in the wrong spot. Malvina took perverse pleasure in these trials, believing that she had devised an intricate web from which Elara could not emerge victorious. Yet the more elaborate the deception, the more it revealed the depth of her own envy and fear of the girl's quiet strength. Even as the stepmother's schemes became increasingly convoluted, Elara's composure never wavered. She observed without reaction, calculated without haste, and endured without complaint. Her patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking allowed her to identify patterns in the stepmother's manipulations. She began to anticipate moves before they were made, predict distractions before they occurred, and recognize false leads even as they were planted. Each attempt to deceive her became an opportunity to refine her approach, to strengthen her resilience, and to demonstrate the quiet power of endurance. By the end of these escalating trials, the household was a landscape of tension and silent observation. Malvina's frustration grew as her elaborate tricks failed to achieve the humiliation she desired. The servants and children, sensing the conflict, tiptoed around the household in anxious compliance. Elara, in contrast, moved with calm deliberation, her awareness of every scheme sharpening her insight and fortifying her spirit. She had become a master of patience and strategy, able to endure cruelty while quietly preparing for the eventual moment when justice, unseen, inevitable and powerful, would tip the balance. The stepmother's relentless attempts to deceive and obstruct revealed both her cruelty and the girl's resilience. Malvina's malice escalated, but it also illuminated Elara's wisdom, courage, and unwavering composure. The more the stepmother schemed, the clearer it became that patience and intelligence were far stronger than malice and envy. Each trick, each deception, was a mirror reflecting the stepmother's own weakness, while Elara's quiet endurance became a testament to the power of calm, strategic action in the face of relentless adversity. The mysterious door had always stood at the far end of the household corridor, a solid, imposing structure of dark polished wood that seemed to absorb the faint light around it. Most in the household ignored it, seeing it as nothing more than an ordinary barrier to a storage room or an unused chamber. But for Elara, the door carried weight far beyond its physical presence. It had long been a threshold between her past and her potential, guarding secrets that belonged solely to her, and it seemed to possess a quiet awareness that no one else could perceive. Over time, subtle signs suggested that this door was not merely passive, but alive in its own mysterious way. The first hint came when her stepmother, Malvina, grew particularly vindictive. Each time the woman schemed or acted from envy, the door reacted in small but unmistakable ways. The polished wood would creak softly, almost as if exhaling a sigh, or a thin, cool draft would slip through the seams, brushing against Elara in a manner that felt deliberate. At first, she thought these sensations were coincidental, the natural quirks of an old house settling under daily strain. Yet as incidents became more frequent and seemingly timed to the stepmother's malice, a pattern began to emerge. The door seemed to notice the energy around it, responding subtly to injustice, tension, or cruelty. Elara first became aware of the door's protective nature one afternoon when Malvina attempted to intercept her in the hallway. The stepmother's expression was sharp, her words barbed, her tone designed to intimidate. Elara, maintaining her calm composure, approached the door for a moment of pause. As she neared it, the door seemed to resist Malvina's advance, not through forceful movement, but through an almost imperceptible shift, as if leaning toward Elara and away from the stepmother. Malvina stumbled slightly on the threshold, her balance affected in a way that seemed more than mere accident. It was subtle yet unmistakable. The door had intervened even minimally to protect the girl. Other signs followed. When Malvina's schemes involved hiding the key or diverting Elara from her path, a faint glow sometimes emanated from the edges of the door, catching the girl's eye at moments of doubt. Elara began to realize that the door's responses were not random, they corresponded to actions driven by malice or dishonesty. When her own intentions were pure, curiosity, care, or rightful pursuit, the door remained still, silent, almost respectful in its obedience. But when injustice or cruelty approached, it became subtly reactive, protective in a way that seemed almost conscious. The household staff, unaware of the nuances of these reactions, dismissed the phenomena as quirks of the building. But Alara observed with quiet diligence. She noted the precise conditions under which the door responded: the heightened heartbeat of someone acting from greed, the sharp, aggressive gestures of those seeking to control her, the whispered commands filled with manipulation. Each instance left an impression, a hint that the door had agency beyond its wooden frame, a silent sentinel for justice, vigilant and perceptive. One evening, as she approached the door after a particularly tense encounter with Malvina, Alara noticed a pattern in the way it moved. The hinges, usually stiff, yielded smoothly under her touch but resisted any attempt by her stepmother to push past it. Even the faintest pressure from malicious hands caused the door to emit a low, almost whispering creak, as if warning or rebuking. The girl's intuition deepened. The door could perceive intention. It responded not to brute strength or random presence, but to moral alignment, the essence of the actions directed toward it. Alara's observations were accompanied by subtle environmental cues. Drafts would shift to guide her steps, warm spots would appear along the threshold as if the wood itself radiated reassurance, and faint sounds, like distant echoes or murmurs, seemed synchronized with moments of ethical tension. Even in the dead of night, when Malvina's schemes became most devious, the door's subtle reactions offered reassurance to Alara, a quiet promise that injustice would not go unchecked within its domain. The mysterious door in these moments revealed more than mere protection. It hinted at judgment. When her stepmother's malice escalated, the door's small responses grew bolder. A soft slam when greed approached, a slight pushback when cruelty attempted to penetrate the chamber, or an imperceptible vibration that aligned with the moral weight of the act. Alara began to understand that the door was both guardian and arbiter, responding not with words but with measured, almost deliberate action that reflected the morality surrounding it. Through these experiences, Alara's awareness of the door's power shaped her behavior. She approached it with respect, confidence, and patience, understanding that it was an ally of justice, a force that could intervene when human malice sought to dominate or suppress her. The door's subtle interventions reinforced her strategy of careful observation and patience, reminding her that she was not alone in her pursuit of rightful access. In the quiet, almost imperceptible shifts of wood and draft, she felt an unspoken alliance, a mystical partnership that guided her toward vindication. By the time the evening shadows lengthened across the corridors, Alara had formed a profound understanding of the door. It was alive in a way that defied explanation, attuned to the moral balance of the household. Its subtle hints, responsive gestures, and protective presence foreshadowed a reckoning that would extend beyond human schemes. Every creak, draft, and glow was a promise, a signal that injustice would meet resistance, and that she, with her patient intelligence and quiet endurance, was deserving of the door's silent protection. The mysterious door's power was no longer just a curiosity, it was a force intimately linked with the household's morality, a sentinel waiting for the right moment to act. Alara's patience, observation, and understanding of this subtle ally prepared her for the inevitable confrontation with her stepmother's schemes, demonstrating that justice could exist even in objects, silently responding to wrongdoing and guiding the innocent toward their rightful course. The tension in the household had reached a crescendo. Lady Malvina, emboldened by her previous successes in manipulating Alara, orchestrated her next scheme with calculated precision. She had learned that subtle threats and misdirection alone were insufficient. She now sought to block Alara entirely from reaching the door that concealed the key and the secret chamber beyond. She summoned her children and loyal servants, instructing them in hushed tones to monitor every step of the girl, ensuring that any approach toward the door would be intercepted. Each participant understood the stakes. The girl must be thwarted, humiliated, and reminded of her perceived weakness. Alara, ever vigilant, observed the heightened activity with quiet composure. She had noticed the unusual movements, the whispered conversations, and the furtive glances exchanged among the conspirators. Yet she felt no fear. The mysterious door had become an ally of subtle strength in her life. Its earlier signs of responsiveness to malice had fortified her confidence. Each creak of its hinges, each soft draft, each imperceptible glow reminded her that she was not alone in the struggle. The door had already proven that it could intervene in the presence of wrongdoing, and now she would witness its power in a more pronounced display. As the conspirators positioned themselves along the hallway, poised to intercept her, Alara approached with deliberate calm. Every step was measured, her body moving in rhythm with the house's familiar sounds, attuned to the smallest shifts in air and light. Malvina's children glanced nervously at each other, uncertain how the girl could move with such certainty amid their plotted blockade. The servants meanwhile shifted uneasily, sensing that something within the house, the ancient, polished door, seemed to hum with awareness, reacting subtly to the ill intentions gathering around it. The moment of confrontation arrived. One of the stepmother's children stepped forward aggressively, reaching for Elara in an attempt to physically restrain her. Simultaneously, a servant tried to block her path with a hastily lifted tray, a calculated obstruction meant to trip or intimidate her. Yet as their combined force moved against her, the door reacted. It was subtle at first, a vibration through the floorboards, a shift in the wooden frame that seemed almost deliberate. Then, with surprising decisiveness, it swung forward on its own hinges, slamming with a solid thud against the child who had lunged. The servant dropped the tray in alarm, stumbling backward as if the very air around the door resisted the intrusion. Elara stepped back slightly, not from fear but from careful observation, as the door's protective nature manifested in full. The conspirators' astonishment was palpable. The polished surface of the door, previously just an object of wood and brass, had become a force to reckon with. It seemed to sense the malice directed toward the girl and responded as if asserting a judgment of its own. The children and servants, once confident in their orchestration of the stepmother's plan, froze in disbelief, their momentum arrested not by human intervention but by the door's mysterious agency. Malvina herself approached, unaware of the door's intent, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief. She had expected control, dominance, and compliance. Instead, she faced the unexpected consequence of her malice. The door's response was measured but deliberate, closing partially on the side of the hallway where she had positioned herself, leaving a narrow gap but enough to convey a warning. A slight rebound, almost imperceptible, nudged her aside, signaling that her schemes were being countered. Every attempt to reach the key through intimidation or physical obstruction was thwarted, leaving her frustration mounting while her perception of the door shifted from inert object to sentient force. The household held its collective breath. Elara, calm and composed, moved closer to the threshold. Her patience, intelligence, and observation had guided her to this precise moment. She had anticipated interference, recognized the conspirators' positions, and relied on the door's subtle responses to safeguard her passage. Each movement was a testament to her strategic patience and understanding of the moral resonance of the door. It was as if the door recognized her rightful pursuit and actively aligned itself against injustice, manifesting a power that human cunning could not subvert. The conspirators' panic deepened. The children and servants attempted to regroup, trying to coordinate another blockade, but the door's reactions had already disrupted their plans. Each movement against the girl was met with a tangible yet mysterious counteraction. Malvina's anger escalated, her schemes unraveling before her eyes, while Elara's composure remained untouched. It became evident to all present that the door's allegiance was not to power or fear but to justice and innocence. In the aftermath of this first foiled attempt, the dynamics of the household began to shift subtly. Fear mingled with awe, and the conspirators found themselves hesitant, second-guessing every move. Even Malvina, despite her fury, could not ignore the clear intervention of a force beyond her understanding. The door had not merely prevented harm, it had issued a statement. It had made visible the consequences of malice and the protective power of moral alignment, reinforcing the principle that actions driven by cruelty would be met with resistance beyond human control. Elara's awareness of the door's power deepened after this encounter. She understood that patience, observation, and moral alignment could transform even the most imposing obstacles into allies. The door's protective response affirmed her strategy. Calm endurance, intelligence, and quiet courage could harness forces unseen yet deeply responsive to justice. The first foiled attempt was a revelation, a signal that her pursuit of rightful access would not be hindered by human schemes alone, and that the household's oppressive dynamics could be countered with subtle yet powerful intervention. By the time the conspirators withdrew, nursing bruised egos and slight stumbles, the message was clear: the door was neither passive nor arbitrary. It was alive in its response to wrongdoing, vigilant in its guardianship, and aligned with the integrity of those who approached it with rightful purpose. Elara, calm and unshaken, had witnessed firsthand that no malice, however persistent, could override the combination of her patience, intelligence, and the door's protective force. The household had shifted into a new rhythm, one underscored by unease and whispered anxiety. Lady Malvina's repeated attempts to manipulate, deceive, and obstruct Elara had failed, leaving the stepmother simmering in frustration. Every trick she had devised, hiding the key, misdirecting the girl, enlisting her children and servants to form a blockade, had been subtly countered by the mysterious door's interventions and Alara's patient vigilance. Malvina found herself pacing the corridors in a state of barely contained fury, her mind racing with increasingly desperate plans, each more elaborate than the last. Yet, with every thwarted attempt, the girl's calm demeanor only seemed to grow more resolute, heightening the tension in the household. Alara moved through her daily tasks with deliberate composure. She swept the floors, arranged the chambers, and attended to her duties with a quiet efficiency that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding her. Malvina's malice no longer surprised her. It had become a predictable pattern, like the ebb and flow of tides she could anticipate. The girl's eyes, always observant, caught every subtle movement. A servant shifting nervously, a child glancing anxiously toward the hallway, the faint creak of the door's hinges signaling its awareness of imminent malice. Through patience and observation, she had begun to discern the household's underlying rhythm, one governed as much by the stepmother's frustration as by the door's protective presence. The tension manifested in small ways. Servants whispered to one another in hushed tones, worried that the next attempt to deceive Alara would invite some unknown consequence. The children of the household, once emboldened by their mother's schemes, now hesitated before acting, their confidence shaken by the door's subtle interventions. Even the stepmother's favored allies, those who had once moved with purpose and certainty, now second-guessed themselves. Each failed attempt left traces of fear, an invisible energy that filled the halls with anticipation and unease. Malvina herself became a study in rising desperation. Her carefully constructed plans had not only failed to harm or delay Alara but had also revealed her own vulnerabilities. The door's interventions were silent yet undeniable, a constant reminder that her cruelty could be countered by forces beyond her understanding. She paced back and forth, muttering to herself, testing theories and revising strategies in a fevered state. Every encounter with the girl, every glance toward the door, seemed to compound her anxiety, and her frustration became a palpable presence, filling the house with tension that extended to every corner. Alara, by contrast, remained a model of calm and discernment. She noticed the shift in the household's atmosphere, the way Malvina's voice carried a sharp edge, the nervous glances exchanged among the servants, and the hesitant movements of the children. The girl's awareness of these changes was not born from fear but from careful observation. She understood that the tension itself was a reflection of the stepmother's failing power, and she used it as a tool to guide her actions. By maintaining her calm, she not only shielded herself from psychological manipulation but also allowed the door's protective qualities to operate without interference, letting the household's own malice reveal its limitations. Small incidents throughout the day highlighted the growing tension. A child attempted to block Alara's path, only to stumble slightly as the door seemed to subtly resist their movement. A servant whispered false instructions about the key's location, but their words were intercepted by the girl's attentive observation, revealing the deceit without confrontation. Malvina's face, tight with irritation, betrayed her awareness that the girl's composure and the door's subtle interventions were preventing her from achieving her objectives. Each thwarted scheme was a reminder that cruelty alone could not guarantee success, and each small failure fueled her growing desperation. The household's atmosphere became a delicate balance between anxiety and restraint. Even those who were not directly involved in the stepmother's machinations began to feel the tension, sensing that something extraordinary governed the space around the door and the girl. Conversations became cautious, movements deliberate, and silence stretched longer in anticipation of potential incidents. The door itself seemed attuned to the shift, creaking softly when malice approached, emanating a sense of readiness that reinforced the household's unease. Amid all this rising tension, Alara's patience remained her strongest asset. She did not rush, she did not act impulsively, and she did not allow herself to be baited by the stepmother's schemes. Her calm was both shield and strategy. It preserved her dignity, maintained her focus, and allowed her to observe the unfolding dynamics with clarity. Each subtle reaction from the door, each misstep by the stepmother or her allies, provided valuable insight into the household state and the nature of the forces at play. As the day wore on, the stepmother's frustration reached new heights. Malvina's plans became more frantic and erratic, her movements increasingly obvious and transparent. The household seemed to vibrate with the combined energy of malice, fear, and anticipation. Yet Alara remained untouched by the chaos, a figure of serene observation amid the swirling tension. Her understanding of patience and strategic thinking, combined with the door's protective qualities, had turned the household's own anxiety into a barrier against harm. By evening, it was evident that the balance of power was shifting. Malvina's frustration, amplified by her repeated failures, had introduced a palpable unease throughout the house. The children, the servants, and even the stepmother herself moved with caution, aware that the girl and the door were aligned in a way that could not be undermined by conventional malice. Ilara, calm and composed, had demonstrated through quiet endurance that her patience, intelligence and observation were far stronger than the stepmother's schemes. The rising tension was no longer simply the result of Malvina's malice. It had become a reflection of her diminishing influence in the household. Every failed attempt, every miscalculation, every subtle intervention by the door reinforced the inevitability that injustice could not prevail. And Ilara, standing at the center of this charged atmosphere, understood fully that patience, vigilance and moral alignment were her allies, ready to turn the stepmother's malice into lessons of caution, awareness and eventual justice. The day of reckoning arrived with an almost tangible weight in the air. The household, already taut with tension from repeated failed schemes, seemed to sense that a moment of decisive action was imminent. Lady Malvina, her patience exhausted and her frustration now bordering on panic, gathered her children and a few trusted servants to enact her boldest plan yet. She intended to confront Ilara directly, block her from reaching the hidden key, and finally assert control over the girl once and for all. Every detail of her scheme had been meticulously considered. The timing, the positioning of the conspirators, the distractions, and the ultimate attempt to overpower Ilara. What Malvina did not anticipate, however, was the full measure of the door's power, which had until now remained subtle but undeniably protective. Ilara moved through the corridor with her usual quiet confidence, her senses attuned to the slightest shifts in the air, the faint creak of wood, and the subtle draft that accompanied the door's presence. She had observed her stepmother's growing desperation and understood that the final confrontation would test not only her patience but also her courage and composure. As she approached the door, she noticed the conspirators positioning themselves strategically, their eyes glinting with malice. Malvina herself was the picture of intensity, her face rigid with determination, her hands poised to seize what she could not control through subtler means. At the first indication of aggression, the door reacted. Its hinges, previously creaking gently or emitting a soft draft, now moved with a deliberate strength, as if infused with sentience. When one of Malvina's children lunged to block Ilara, the door's wooden frame shifted forward subtly but decisively, nudging the child aside. Another servant attempted to intercept her path, only to find the floorboards beneath them trembling slightly, causing them to lose balance and stumble. Each action was met with a calculated, almost intelligent counter from the door, creating an invisible barrier that rendered Malvina's efforts ineffective. The stepmother, sensing that something extraordinary was occurring, moved closer with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She shouted commands to her children and servants, attempting to coordinate a combined effort to overwhelm Ilara. But the door anticipated these moves in ways that defied logic. When Malvina pushed against it in an attempt to close it and block the girl, the door swung slightly of its own accord, positioning itself between the aggressors and Ilara. The polished wood seemed to absorb the malice directed at it, deflecting the stepmother's force while maintaining its protective barrier. Even the slightest attempt to intimidate or coerce was met with resistance, the door asserting its presence like a vigilant guardian that would not be circumvented. Ilara, calm and composed as ever, did not need to exert herself. She observed, stepped carefully, and let the door's actions complement her awareness. Her patience and discernment were magnified by the door's intervention, each movement of wood and frame aligned perfectly with her own strategic understanding of the situation. The conspirators, once confident and aggressive, now faltered under the unexpected and inexplicable force of the door. Their confusion was evident. One moment they thought they had an opening, the next they were blocked, nudged, or slightly unbalanced, their plans unraveling in real time. Malvina's frustration escalated into panic. She realized that the door's power could not be ignored, reasoned with, or overpowered. Every attempt to act against Ilara had been countered, every scheme foiled by an invisible intelligence aligned with justice. In a final, desperate move, she lunged toward the girl, hoping to seize the key or force compliance. The door responded instantly. It swung with precision, positioning itself so that Malvina and her allies were momentarily trapped in the narrow hallway. The floor beneath them seemed to subtly tilt, further impeding their movements. The stepmother's shouts turned into cries of alarm as she realized that her malice was no longer sufficient to achieve her goals. Ilara remained untouched, a figure of serene composure amid the chaos. She stepped forward confidently, her gaze steady, her demeanor unshaken. It was as if her calm had created a shield of sorts, amplified by the door's responsiveness. Every threat was mitigated, every malicious advance foiled, and the conspirators found themselves vulnerable not to human retribution but to the door's measured and deliberate intervention. The door had fully asserted its power, no longer subtle or passive, but decisive and unyielding, demonstrating that justice could manifest even in objects, responding to the moral weight of human actions. The climactic confrontation reached its peak when Malvina, realizing her plans had utterly failed, tried one final act of aggression. She lunged forward, intent on forcing Elara aside. At that instant, the door seemed to pulse with energy, its polished surface gleaming as though alive. It swung slightly, enclosing Malvina and the remaining conspirators in a protective embrace, the angles and weight perfectly calibrated to prevent harm to the girl while simultaneously restraining the aggressors. Shock and fear overtook the stepmother and her allies. They struggled in vain, their own malice becoming the very force that confined them. With the door fully asserting its power, the household fell into a stunned silence. Elara, untouched and dignified, looked calmly at her stepmother and the others, who now stood humbled and powerless before her. The confrontation had revealed the truth. Cruelty, envy and malice could not prevail when faced with patience, intelligence and forces aligned with justice. The door, an unassuming wooden threshold moments before, had become a sentinel of moral order, enforcing a reckoning that no human scheme could overturn. By the time the tension eased and Malvina and her allies retreated, subdued and chastened, it was clear that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Elara's quiet endurance, combined with the door's decisive action, had ensured that she remained unharmed while the conspirators faced the consequences of their intentions. The climactic confrontation had demonstrated unequivocally that justice, even when manifest through mysterious and unseen forces, would protect the innocent and hold the malicious accountable.